They called him the Half-Blood Ranger because he was the only man in Texas who wore a ranger's badge on his chest and eagle feathers in his hair. He walked between two worlds, carrying the law of the white man in one hand and the spirit of his Apache ancestors in the other. But what happens when the law he swore to protect becomes a weapon used against his own blood? His name was Cade Nakai, though his mother's people called him Kestrel for his sharp eyes that could spot a rider coming from 5 miles away. His father had been a Texas Ranger who died when Cade was just a boy. His mother was Apache, from a small village that sat near the Rio Grande. She raised him with stories of both worlds, tales of brave rangers who brought order to the wild frontier, and legends of Apache warriors who could move through the desert like ghosts. When Cade turned 18, he joined the Texas Rangers, just like his father before him. He believed the law could bring real justice to this rough land. He was good at his job, maybe the best tracker the Rangers had ever seen. He could read signs in the dirt that other men couldn't even see. He could follow a trail over solid rock where most men would give up. The other Rangers respected his skills, but they always watched him with careful eyes. They never let him forget that half his blood came from the people they sometimes had to fight. Cade didn't let their looks bother him. He had a job to do, and he did it well. Every few weeks he would ride out to visit his mother's village. He brought supplies, flour, salt, cloth for making clothes. He brought news from the towns and warnings when trouble was coming their way. The Apache elders didn't fully trust him either. They saw the badge on his chest and wondered if he had forgotten his mother's teachings. But Cade believed he could be a bridge between these two worlds. He believed he could help both sides understand each other better. Then Bartholomew Kane came to town. Kane was a cattle baron from back east, who had made his fortune in ways most folks didn't want to know about. He was a big man with cold grey eyes and hands that had never done an honest day's work. He bought up land all around the territory, pushing out smaller ranchers who couldn't match his prices or his threats. Kane had 20 men who worked for him, hard men who were quick with their guns and didn't ask questions about the work they were paid to do. Kane wanted the land where the Apache village stood. Most white folks didn't know why that scrubby piece of desert was worth anything, but Kane had learned about the hidden spring that bubbled up from deep underground. In this dry country, water was worth more than gold. That spring could water 10,000 head of cattle. It could make a rich man even richer. But the Apache had lived on that land for generations. It was sacred to them. Their ancestors were buried in the red earth. Their children had played in the shade of the same rocks where their grandparents had played. They would not sell, no matter how much money Kane offered, so Kane decided to take it another way. His men started causing trouble near the village. They would ride close at night, firing their guns in the air. They would leave dead animals near the water source. They spread stories in town that the Apache were stealing cattle. Kane was smart about it. He picked cattle from small ranchers who were already struggling. He had his men drive the cattle near the Apache village, then back to his own land. When the ranchers came looking for their missing stock, Kane's men would point them toward the Apache lands. They would find tracks leading in that direction, tracks that Kane's men had carefully made. The anger in town grew with each missing cow. People who had lived peacefully near the Apache for years started talking about driving them out. Kane stood in the saloon buying drinks for angry ranchers, stoking the fire with careful words. "I'm not saying they're all thieves," Kane would say, his voice smooth as oil. "But when good Christian folks are losing their livelihood, something has to be done." Cade heard about the missing cattle and rode out to investigate. He found the tracks leading toward the Apache village, just like everyone said. But Cade knew how to read signs that others missed. He saw where the tracks had been made by horses wearing shoes. Apache horses didn't wear shoes. He found places where the cattle had been turned back, driven in circles to confuse their path. He followed the real trail, the one hidden under the false one, and it led straight to Kane's ranch. Cade gathered his evidence carefully. He found the missing cattle in a box canyon on Kane's land, their brands freshly changed but still readable underneath if you knew how to look. He talked to one of Kane's men who had been drinking too much and got him to admit what they had been doing. He wrote it all down in his notebook, making his case as solid as he could. He rode into town and went straight to Sheriff Morrison's office. Morrison was an older man who had been sheriff for 10 years. He listened to Cade's report with a frown on his face. "That's a serious accusation you're making, Ranger," Morrison said. "Bartholomew Kane is an important man in this town." "The law is the law," Cade replied. "It doesn't matter how important a man is if he's stealing cattle and blaming innocent people." Morrison said he would look into it. Cade then went to Judge Patterson, showing him the same evidence. The judge, a thin man who always looked nervous, promised to consider the matter carefully, but nothing happened. Days passed, and Cade's men kept spreading their lies. The anger in town grew worse. Cade went back to the sheriff, then to the judge. They gave him excuses. They said his evidence wasn't strong enough. They said he was letting his Apache blood cloud his judgment. Maybe you should think about which side you're on, Ranger. Sheriff Morrison finally told him, your badge means you serve the people of Texas, not Apache thieves. They're not thieves, Cade said, his voice hard, and I've proved it. You've proved nothing, the sheriff said, and if I were you, I'd be careful about defending them too loudly. Folks are already wondering about your loyalties. Cade left the sheriff's office with rage burning in his chest. The law he had believed in, the law he had sworn to uphold, was failing him. It was being twisted and used as a weapon by men with money and power. He decided to ride out to the Apache village to warn them about the growing danger. He would help them prepare to defend themselves if Cade's men came. But he was already too late. Cain had chosen his moment carefully. While Cade was in town trying to make the law work, Cain and his 20 men rode out at sunrise. The Apache warriors were out hunting, leaving mostly women, children, and elders in the village. Cain's men came in fast and hard, setting fire to the shelters, shooting anyone who tried to fight back. By the time Cade saw the smoke rising in the distance and rode hard toward the village, it was over. The shelters were burning. Bodies lay scattered in the dust. The survivors were huddled together, crying and tending to the wounded. Cade found his mother near what had been her home. She had been shot in the chest and was dying. He knelt beside her, taking her hand. Her eyes, still bright despite her pain, looked up at him. "My son," she whispered, "you tried to walk in both worlds." "I failed," Cade said, tears running down his face. "The law failed." "Some laws are written in books," his mother said, her voice growing weaker. "But true justice is written on the heart. Remember who you are, Kestrel. Remember both parts of yourself." She died as the sun climbed higher in the sky, her hand going limp in his. Cade sat there for a long time, holding his mother's body. Around him, the survivors began the work of gathering their dead. They looked at him with eyes that held no blame, only sorrow. They had lost everything, and the law had done nothing to protect them. Slowly, Cade stood up. He unpinned the Ranger badge from his chest. He looked at it for a moment, this piece of metal he had been so proud to wear. Then he laid it gently on his mother's body. One of the elder women brought him paint made from red clay and black ash. Cade painted his face with the symbols of his tribe, marks that meant justice and vengeance. He was no longer just a ranger. He was no longer trying to live in both worlds. He was something new now, a man who would use everything he had learned from both his fathers to hunt down the men who had done this. Cain and his men had ridden back to town, confident that no one would challenge them. They celebrated in the saloon, drinking and laughing about how they had solved the Apache problem. Cain bought rounds for everyone, playing the part of the hero who had protected the town from thieves. But their celebration was short-lived. The first of Cain's men disappeared while checking his trap lines at sunrise. They found him tied to a tree, alive but scared out of his mind. An eagle feather was pinned to his shirt. He babbled about a ghost that had come out of the rocks, moving so fast he couldn't see it clearly. The second man vanished while riding alone to check on cattle. His horse came back without him. They found him hours later, hanging upside down from a rope, swinging from a high branch. Another eagle feather was tied to his ankle. He said he never heard anyone coming. One moment he was riding, the next he was on the ground with a rope around his legs. Cade was using everything he knew. He used his ranger training to track the men, to learn their patterns and habits. He used his Apache knowledge to move through the land unseen, to set traps that wouldn't be noticed until it was too late. He wasn't killing them. Death would be too easy. He was breaking them, filling them with the same fear they had brought to the village. Cain tried to keep his men together, but fear was spreading through them like wildfire. They had faced other men in gunfights. They had burned out native villages before. But this was different. This enemy knew them. He knew where they would go before they went there. He knew their weaknesses, and he left those eagle feathers like a signature, telling them exactly who was hunting them. More men fell or ran away. One was found buried up to his neck in an anthill. Another woke up surrounded by rattlesnakes that Cain had carefully placed around his bedroll while he slept. Each time the eagle feather was there, and each time the man was left alive but broken. Soon Cain was down to just 5 men, and even they were ready to run. Cain himself was starting to feel the fear. He moved from his ranch to the hotel in town, thinking he would be safe surrounded by people. But Cade had spent years in this town. He knew every building, every alley, every rooftop. Kane woke up one morning to find an eagle feather on his pillow, inches from his face. He hadn't heard anyone come in. His door was still locked. But the message was clear. Cade could reach him anywhere. That was when Kane decided to run. He gathered his remaining men, and they rode out at sunrise, heading for the rocky canyons to the north. He figured he could lose anyone tracking him in those winding passages of stone. But he didn't know those canyons like Cade did. Cade had played in those canyons as a boy. His mother had shown him the hidden paths, the places where sound carried strangely, the spots where a man could disappear into shadow. He knew exactly where Kane would go. There was only one way through that wouldn't leave him trapped. As the sun started to set, painting the canyon walls red as blood, Kane and his men entered a narrow passage between two high walls of stone. That was when Cade appeared, standing on a ledge above them. He didn't have his ranger badge, but he wore his gun. His face was still painted with the symbols of justice. Kane's men reached for their weapons, but Cade had chosen his position well. The setting sun was behind him, blinding them. The canyon walls echoed with his voice when he spoke. "Bartholomew Kane," Cade called out, "you burned a peaceful village. You killed innocent people. You used the law as a weapon. Now you face judgment." Kane tried to talk his way out, offering money, making threats. But Cade wasn't listening. He had set his trap perfectly. Rocks began falling from above, not enough to kill, but enough to spook the horses. The animals reared and bucked, throwing their riders. In the confusion, Cade moved like his namesake, the kestrel, swift and sure. When the dust settled, Kane's men were disarmed and tied up. Kane himself was on his knees in the dirt. Cade's gun pointed at his head. For a moment, it looked like Cade would pull the trigger. Kane certainly deserved it. But Cade remembered his mother's words about justice being written on the heart. Instead of killing him, Cade tied Kane up with the others. He had gathered all the evidence of Kane's crimes, not just the cattle theft and the false accusations, but documents he had found at Kane's ranch, showing other crimes, other villages burned, other innocent people killed. He loaded Kane and his men on their horses and led them not back to the corrupt sheriff in town, but to the main ranger outpost 2 days' ride away. The rangers there knew Cade. They had heard he had quit, that he had thrown away his badge. But when he rode in with Kane and the evidence of his crimes, they listened. Kane had made enemies among the rangers too, men who had suspected his crimes but couldn't prove them. Now Cade had given them everything they needed. Kane was put on trial, a real trial, with honest judges and lawyers. He was found guilty and sent to prison for the rest of his life. His men were scattered to different prisons across Texas. The land Kane had stolen was returned to its rightful owners, including the sacred ground of the Apache. Cade never put his badge back on. He had found his own path, one that didn't belong completely to either world but drew strength from both. He became a legend in that part of Texas, the half-blood ranger who lived by his own code. Some called him when the regular law couldn't or wouldn't help. He protected those who couldn't protect themselves, using his skills to bring justice where it was needed most. He built a small cabin on a hill between the town and where the Apache village had been. From there he could watch over both communities. He taught young men from both worlds how to track, how to read the land, how to understand each other. He never married, but he found peace in his purpose. Years later, when folks would tell stories about the half-blood ranger, they would remember the man who wore both badges and feathers. They would remember that sometimes true justice isn't about the badge you wear or the laws written in books. Sometimes it's about the honor you carry inside and the courage to stand up for what's right, even when the whole world is against you. Cade's story shows us that real strength comes from understanding who you are and accepting all parts of yourself. What did you think of his quest for justice? Let us know in the comments below. And don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more stories from the Old West where heroes came in all forms and justice was sometimes found in the most unexpected places.